Hello and welcome to the Business of Authority. I'm Jonathan Stark.
And I'm Rochelle Moulton.
And today we're going to consider cold outreach, what it is, when to do it, and how to do it.
Yes, cold outreach.
Dear listener, I'm sure that struck fear in your heart. So many people are just tremble at the idea of cold outreach, but we're here to tell you that it's not all bad. It can be fun, in fact.
Yeah, I like it. I wouldn't want to spend my whole day doing just that, but it's really a fun part of building an expertise business.
Yeah, and it works. So there's that.
Oh, yeah, there's that.
Yeah. Cool. Let's start off by defining the term cold outreach. How would you define it for yourself or your clients?
I think of it as anytime I need to reach out to someone that I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Just simple as that I don't already know.
Exactly the same definition. It's like you're walking up to a stranger and sticking your hand out saying, hi.
Hi, I'm Rochelle.
Yeah, exactly.
What's your name?
Right. And so as a junior high wallflower at the dance, I understand why that would be nerve-wracking to people. And I know that lots of people I talk to, especially ones, if we're talking about this, maybe in one of my Slack rooms or something, there's always going to be people who are, including me, that can rattle off 100 examples of absolutely atrocious cold outreach that they get, that their inbox just fills up with every day. Mm-hmm. And especially if you have a podcast. So it's constant and it's annoying, and you don't want to be like that. And so my response to that is like, well, don't be like that. But it doesn't mean you can't email someone that you don't know, or you can't DM someone on Twitter that you don't know, or LinkedIn or Instagram or wherever you are. It's because you probably, I know I also get stuff that I don't lump into cold outreach because I'm glad they emailed. I'm glad they did.
Exactly. It's kind of like you think about those two situations, and those terrible ones, the visual is a giant X over those, right?
Yeah.
And then the other ones are, think about what are the cold emails you got that you were happy to receive.
Yeah.
If that will help you break through this idea that not all cold outreach is bad.
Yeah, like imagine an acquisitions editor from a big publisher sent you an email and said, hey, we'd like to talk about doing a book with you. That's cold outreach.
Yeah, we'd love to have that in our inbox, wouldn't we?
It's cold outreach, right? And what's the difference? The difference is they're not trying to take something from you. They are sending a highly relevant message to you for a very specific reason. It's just super relevant, and it's potentially mutually beneficial versus people that are just constantly barraging. Let's just use the podcast example, constantly barraging you with 1,500 word email introducing you to Tyler Byler, who's made $1 billion. And it's like, he would really love to come on your show and share it. Your audience will be so glad you have. And it's like, I don't even read them. I don't even open them anymore.
Yeah.
Right. Those are just take.
Well, there's also people who don't do their homework.
That's what I mean, right?
Yeah, well, people who send me something that's like, oh, so-and-so can write this great article about, I don't know, some new technology nobody's ever heard of. I'm like, did you look at my stuff? Have you ever seen a guest article? Have you ever seen me write about breaking technology? Like, no. So, yeah, so those are pretty easy to just delete. And those are the ones with the X over their face.
Right. So you want to be more like the acquisitions editor from a big publisher. So like, what's in it for the recipient? Basically, it's like, is this mutually beneficial or potentially mutually beneficial? So, okay. So if it's just emailing someone who doesn't know you, then, and there's good ways to do that and bad ways to do that, then when does it make sense for the dear listener, or you, Rochelle, or me, or our students, or anybody like that? When does it make sense to do cold outreach?
Well, I mean, if we pile on what we just said, then the time that it makes the most sense is when you have something that's potentially mutually beneficial. And so that's not like pitching something that you just maybe thought of yesterday, but it is about figuring out where your interests meet. And to me, that's when it gets interesting. So if I want to be on somebody's podcast, that's a great opportunity because we both win, assuming that I'm a good fit for their audience. We both win, right? I get broader exposure. They get the content that they need and their audience learns something. So it's really finding, instead of thinking about it just from your own point of view, is looking at it from the other side. What will they get out of that? Which, by the way, when we talk about how to do it, will help you craft the email that you want to reach out to them with.
Yeah, absolutely. So I find that it feels like, I don't track this, but it feels like when I'm most effective at, let's call it introducing myself to someone over email or social media, it's most effective when I've already accidentally done my homework. So what do I mean by that? So like
accidentally,
right. So it's not like I said, okay, here's a list of, I did a Google search for top 10 business books of 2022 or 2023, and I'm just going to email every single author and see if they want to come on the podcast. Just blindly. Like, I've never read the books. Mm-hmm. I don't recognize their names. I don't know what they're about. And I just do it. That's not going to work. Like, that's not what I'm talking about. The thing that I am talking about is when, a bunch of people recommend some new book, people whose opinion aligns with mine. And I'm like, I should check this out. I'm reading it. I'm loving it. I hit a passage that blows my mind. I put the book down and I I'll DM the author on Twitter and say, like, OMG, I'm reading title of book right now. In chapter 4, you said this thing about, I don't know, hourly billing that absolutely blew my mind. I've been thinking about this for 10 years and this is a new angle. It never occurred to me before. I'd love to have you on Ditching Hourly or Business of Authority to talk about that specific point. If there's any interest, let me know and I'll tell you the details. It's fine to say no. Totally understand if you don't have time to do it, but just wanted to say thanks for the book. Like, does that seem like spam? It doesn't seem like spam to me, but that's what I mean by accidentally doing my homework. Like I didn't start with, I want to trick Seth Godin into coming on the show. Like, I've never heard of Seth Godin before.
Which wouldn't work, by the way.
Yeah, of course. But it's not like that. It's like I have this detector mechanism in the back of my mind that when it's often an author that with me, it's mostly happens when I'm reading a book and I'm like, oh, this is so good.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's from a video. Sometimes it's from a video that someone sent me. But I don't think it occurs to everyone to just like, well, I'm going to email the author. Like they might think, oh, I'm going to give this a good review on Amazon or at the end of an Audible book when it's like, rate this review and then do it. But it's like, no, I'm emailing the person, like the actual author and thanking them for it, telling them exactly what blew my mind. And guess what? Authors love that.
Oh, of course we do.
It's like the whole point of reading the book.
Well, and the other thing about that example is that you pick something very specific. So you didn't say, oh, and understand the author would still be pleased with, oh, I loved the book and you did these 5 different chapters about X and it was great. This is short and sweet. It says, love the book, but in particular, that place in chapter 5 where you said,
right.
Blew me away, would love to have you on the show. And that's another thing that will always help you get somebody to say yes is when you make it so specific like that. It's obvious that somebody didn't just say, oh, I loved your book. Would you come on my show? I'm like, you didn't read it, did you?
Right.
Or you would have said something about what was in it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's fine if it's like a small ask, but if it's a big name, you're not going to get them by saying, oh, the book was so nice. Would you come on the show?
Yeah, totally. I mean, it was when Seth did come on this show, I brought up a really specific point. I didn't bring it up in advance. I brought it up on the show about a point he made in Icarus Deception. And he made a joke about how he's like, oh, well, whenever you ask me a question about a book I wrote 10 years ago, it might be hard for me to answer. But in this case, I do happen to remember that part. And if you're reaching out to an author, if we just stick with that example for a second, if somebody reached out to me and was like, hey, I'd love to talk to you about Hourly Billing is Nuts on my show or something like that, I would be like, I don't even remember what's in that book, exactly. It's been 8 years since I wrote it. I don't read it every day.
Like, you don't?
Right? It's just like,
yeah.
It was a moment in time, right? And like when I went back into the audiobook for it a couple of years later, I was like, oh, I didn't remember this. I don't remember writing this. Like there are things in it I don't even remember writing because some of this stuff I wrote in like 5 years before the book came out. So point being, if you trigger almost like their memory and be like, oh yeah, I remember writing that. I thought that was a good insight too. I agree that was a good insight, and you picked up on it, person who's reaching out to me. And I could talk about that one thing for 45 minutes easily. It's just such an easy yes.
And that's what we're going for, right? When you do this stuff, you want to make it an easy yes. In fact, I like to think that's the goal.
So if we're talking about when to do it, I would say, when inspiration strikes and you're sort of reading something, listening to a podcast, and you're like, oh, that would be, even if you just reach out to the person, not to invite them, not to ask them to do anything, but just let them know that you were, that it was great, or whatever is on your mind. Like my brother Matt sent me a link to a scientific podcast. There's really nothing. I mean, not that a scientist couldn't be an authority, but it was very technical. It was not our kind of audience. It's not someone that we would have on this show. And I was literally like, I just got to email this person, like this woman in the UK. And so I just looked her up, emailed her, asked her a question that was, I set the context from the episode, because I know she probably went on 100 shows and doesn't remember being on this specific one, or what she said, certainly. So I was like, oh, on this show, you're talking to these people, they asked you this, you said this. And my question is, and I had a question, it would be okay if I asked. Yeah, sure. And it was like, well, how do I know everything is an hallucination? Like, how do you check that? Right. And she was like, good question. So we ended up in this little conversation that spawned because in the moment I was excited about this idea. I had this desire to ask this question, and in the person, it was total cold outreach, totally by our definition. And she responded, engaged, seemed happy about it, sent me like, here's some more stuff you could read about it. It's really cool. And I could probably reach back on that thread if there was some future reason to, or some mutually beneficial thing, or maybe it did make sense to have her come on TBOA. Say like, hey, remember me? Blah, blah, blah. It's not evil. And so when to do it, a great time to do it is when you're inspired by something like this. It could be a lot of other things besides inviting people on a show or asking them a question or something like that. But it's the beginning. It's the fledgling little spark of a relationship.
Yes. And what's nice about that is that you're not asking a big ask. It's you're genuinely interested, and think about it from your own perspective, from the listener's perspective, which is it's in your area of expertise. If you're that woman getting this, you're intrigued by that. Somebody has a question, maybe they come at this a different way. Jonathan's not a scientist. He thinks about it differently, and you can have a really amazing conversation. And most experts are going to welcome that kind of conversation. But I also like to do, we've talked on the show about the listening tours that I've done. I think I've done 3 now. I think of the listening tour that way too. They were, not everyone was someone that I didn't know, but a number of them were, or they were somebody that was on my list. Now, maybe that's cheating. Maybe that's not cold outreach. Somebody that was on my list, but that I'd never spoken to, didn't really know them. And the listening tour, the idea there is that you're designing something, you're creating a product or a membership or a service of some kind, and you just want to get input, not so much on the thing, but you want to find out, what are they thinking about? What keeps them up at night? What kinds of problems do they have? What kinds of solutions have they tried? What didn't work? What would be kind of the magical solution if they could just wave their magic wand and it would appear? And so that's a situation where you're getting a lot, right? And when I did them, I was getting a lot from the people that I talked to. But the flip side that was really interesting to me is that I think most of the people that I talked to, I would wish all, but I'm going to say most to be on the safe side, felt like they were getting something too, because we were talking about their problems. Mm-hmm. Right. And there's just something about most humans where we love to be consulted for our opinions on things.
Yes.
We'll spend more time on the phone with you if you keep asking our opinions. Now, if you're going to lecture to us, going to hang up.
Yep.
But yeah. And so even when you think kind of it's all about you, it really isn't. I mean, the reason I was asking people was because I wanted to create something that would work for them. And yeah, I didn't want to create a bomb for myself either, but it really was about them. Tell me about this. How did this work? What did you try? What happened when you tried that? What worked? Was there a piece of this that you're still doing today? And you kind of get inside their heads, but there's never a pitch. I'm never saying buy this thing.
Right.
I'm saying thank you for your input.
Yep.
And then the close is usually, would it be okay if I pinged you if I had a quick question on something, or if I wanted a quick reaction? Oh,
right.
Of course. But I wouldn't call them again. I wouldn't take up more of their time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have a similar story. Back when I was sort of testing the target credit unions as a target market toward the end of my consulting business, and I cannot tell you how many people jumped on the phone with me and just spilled their guts because like I had the best luck with people who were retired from the industry, right? Which is great because they were like, like retired credit union presidents. And because I was looking to, the services that I was selling would be at the highest level of the organization. So, probably the president or someone up there, CTO maybe. And I would connect with these folks, and I'd say something along, I could actually go back and look, maybe I will, but I would connect with them, and essentially the question, you have to make it non-threatening because they're probably afraid of getting a pitch. But since these folks were retired, there was nothing, they weren't the customer, but they used to be the customer. So they just know everything. And so I would say something along the lines of it's like, hey, I'm thinking about creating a product. It is, thinking about creating a product for credit union presidents, right? So there's nothing to sell, and these people wouldn't buy anyway. So I'm thinking about creating something for credit union presidents, but I don't want to solve a problem that doesn't exist. So I would love to get just a couple of minutes where I could get your expert opinion about, just talk to you about some of the challenges that you face with regard to technology in the space, or maybe I even said at the time mobile. And I had people call me from the car. They're like, "Oh, we're on the way to the summer house, but figured we'd," because they're like really excited. I don't know a lot of retired people, but like my dad, he'd pick up the phone if somebody wanted to ask him details about the newspaper industry or something where he was an executive.
They're thrilled to feel like their expertise is relevant and needed
and useful.
It makes them feel really good. Yeah.
Right. So there's something in it for them. I got a lot out of it too. In fact, what I got out of it was like, wrong industry, don't pick this one. But it was like super, but it was, finish the call, call me like sign up for a 15-minute call, end up on the phone for 45 minutes. I've got like 5 pages of notes, and they're like, call me anytime, you can use this number. I had one guy that was still in-house, still an employee. And we jumped on the phone, and within a couple of minutes, he goes, hold on a second. I hear him get up from his desk, close his office door, and come back. And he's like, okay, here's what's really going on. And just totally like, vented to someone who cared. Like I legitimately cared. I was curious about it. And this guy was very frustrated. Anyway, it was
Well,
it was hilarious.
There's another moral in there, though, right? Because here was a guy, think about this. He's the head of this credit union. He can't talk to anybody internally. Mm-hmm. If he's lucky, he maybe has a service provider he can talk to. But even then, he's probably kind of careful about that. And so here comes somebody from the outside, an expert in their field, saying, what do you think? And I think we underestimate this as consultants, especially if you're dealing with the top of the house. It doesn't matter the size of the organization. If you're dealing with soloists or you're dealing with, CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, that is a lonely job. Mm-hmm. They are hard jobs and they are lonely. And if all you do is just listen and ask some questions, you'll be amazed at the reception.
Right.
There is something in there for them. And that's maybe an extreme example because they were retired. So most of them were. And so, that was a little bit different. But if somebody is actively in the industry, actively working, has an organization, I guarantee they have frustrations, and there's not a lot of places for them to just vomit it out.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So if we're talking about when to inspiration, maybe when you're inspired by something someone said, that's a good time to reach out to them. Or if you legitimately are, designing some new product or service, or you have an idea, you've got a hypothesis, that's a great time to reach out to people and do that sort of thing. So it's like when to do this. Well, before I build something is a good time to do it. When you're thinking about building something, creating
But I
some new
think
thing.
the other thing that some people might be wondering is, so should I hate that word, should I have cold outreach somehow built into my business model? And I want to talk about that a little bit, because I've worked with some people who, especially when they pivoted, what they did at the beginning of that pivot is they did include some cold outreach, because they very specifically identified who their ideal client was. Mm-hmm. And often what they did was, they basically trolled LinkedIn, which is a great place because you have titles and organizations. You could do some pretty interesting searches there, and then had a program of cold outreach, cold calls, one might call them. Mm-hmm. But they're very specific because you've identified your ideal client, and then you can create a plan around that you just work a little bit at a time. Like whether you do a little bit every day or just a little bit every week, maybe you do 2 emails a week to people that you don't know. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't sound really hard, does it?
Right. Well, so you just gave me a really visual, tangible idea for a really tangible metaphor, which was imagine if you treat the outreach like a gift, right? So imagine if you were trying to buy a housewarming gift for someone you've never met, you don't know, you don't know you literally know nothing about them. You probably, odds are high that you'd buy something that they probably just want to throw away, right? If you just sent them a housewarming gift, hey, congratulations on the new house, here's a Smeg toaster, right? Mm-hmm. And they just feel like, no, this doesn't match our style. I already have a toaster. I have a better toaster, blah, 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 blah. The odds of you giving something that they're going to be really excited about are infinitesimal. So but the difference is, now think of someone that you know extremely well, and you could buy a housewarming gift or birthday gift, whatever it is, like something, and then they open it up, like, oh, this is perfect. How did you know? How did you know? Right? That's what you're shooting for. You're shooting for that. How did you know? Which is, I think if you listen back, dear listener, to the conversation so far, that is, if there's a trick to this, it's that, like, where it's perfect. Like the thing that you're presenting them with just lights them up. They're like, yeah, I would love to talk about the problems of, tech problems in credit union space. Or yeah, I'd love to talk about, that passage, that highly specific passage on page 72 of my book. It's like the perfect housewarming gift for someone, and they're just like, can't believe how good it is. And so to them, it doesn't feel like spammy or cold calling or pushy or desperate, because you've somehow, know them. Somehow you manage to figure that out, and it sets you apart from the 100 other garbage emails they get every day.
Yeah, you get me.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
I mean, that's why we talk constantly about deciding what kind of profile to focus on. Like, what's your client avatar? Because everybody in that space is not going to be the same. But what you will learn is the tighter you make that ideal client, the easier it is to guess. And you really can do more than guess, but the easier it is to guess what's going to light them up. Mm-hmm. And it's not very much research that you need to do. And most of it's going to be on LinkedIn, especially if somebody's commenting on posts or posting their own. You get a sense for their hot buttons, and you can stalk them basically legally. You can stalk their content so that you get to know who they are.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And so that when you do send that present, it is received in that way. It is received in that spirit. That was like, wow, this person really gets me.
Well, and that's the key, because I love the metaphor, because I'm thinking, I've met a couple of people where when there's a housewarming, they always buy the same gift. Like, whoever it is, it's the same gift. It doesn't matter if it's not their style. It doesn't matter if they have a better toaster. It's always the same gift. And you don't want to be that person. Right. You want to be the one that figures out. Yes. Well, it's not thoughtless, because they are showing up with a gift, but they haven't done a lot of preparation for it. They haven't developed or demonstrated a level of care.
Right.
that the perfect gift demonstrates.
Yeah, it's like walking in with your favorite bottle of whiskey and saying, "Hey, let's open it now."
Yeah, and guess what? It's a sober household.
Yeah, right. Or giving your wife a bowling ball with your initials on it. It's like Homer Simpson.
Yeah.
So, okay. So there's one more when to do it thing that you were starting to allude to before I interrupted with the housewarming gift idea, which is the best time to do it is when you don't need to do it, when it can be organic and serendipitous and genuine, and it kind of like just in general marketing in general, like when should you do it? Well, every day, a little bit, or at least every week. So if you the best time to do it, let's put it like that. The best time to do it is when you really don't need anything from the other person. Like you're not looking for, you're like, a client, I got fired. I need business. I need work right now. Like that's a bad time to do it. Or that's a hard time to do it well when you are genuinely desperate for money. I mean, that's like a really hard time to do it well.
Yeah, you just can't reek of desperation. And I'm sorry, if you're looking to put food on the table from cold outreach, that's what it feels like to the person, because they see it, even if you don't.
You can sense it.
They see it, they feel it. Yeah. And it just leaches through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You're just a little too anxious.
Yeah. Well, and, and I kind of want to go back to, I'm thinking about like if you're just starting your consulting business and you're kind of calling around to the people in your geographic area, like, oh, I have a web design consulting business. That's going to be hard to get those kinds of calls. If you say instead, well, I'm doing web design services for veterinarians who want to grow their business, that's different. And you're not going to go to an architect. You're not going to go to, a retail shop in town. You're going to be very selective, and you're going to give them something through your conversation that's different than you would have had before. So this focus is really important. This is not about, let me just like shoot, 100 bullets out of the cannon. No, bullets don't go out of a cannon. 100 balls out of the cannon, and let's see, which ones, fall where I want them to. No,
yeah.
This is really much more thoughtful and much more one-to-one.
Yeah, especially for soloists, like, because let's be honest, I've interviewed people who, have a dev shop with, a team of say 5 people building stuff and a team of 20 salespeople. So like 4x the number of salespeople than the people who do the actual work, and they smile and dial all day and it works. Like they get one hit out of 100, and of those hits, they get somebody on the phone, and maybe they get one hit out of 100 on those, and that's enough. But, they're clogging up the phone lines with untargeted, irrelevant interruptions that the vast majority of people are annoyed by. It still works, but it just turns into a gross kind of numbers game. And
the brand of that organization, if it has a name that's at all memorable,
yeah,
there are going to be people who just, see that logo with a crossed big X over it.
Right. But it's not that they don't do good work. They probably do, but maybe, right? It's just not relevant. Right?
That becomes the trust factor. If I have somebody spamming me, I'm not going to believe that they have good work, and I'm not going to bother to find out. Get out of my face.
Agreed.
Go away.
Agreed. Right. So you're probably gonna reach price buyers. The yeses you're gonna get are probably gonna be from price buyers who don't really differentiate you from anybody else. It's just like you were the one that showed up, and it's like, that's fine, but I could look around if I wanted to, but you emailed me first, so like let's just get this over with. And I do have a pressing need right now, so it's just a convenience factor. But the point is, like, no one listening to this probably wants to do that, and even if they wanted to, I don't think. It'd be really hard. It'd be a very unique personality that could, as a soloist, spend the time to do that, to put up the kind of numbers you'd need to put up for it to actually work and not get massively demoralized in the process.
Yeah. I've never seen a solo model do that.
Right.
I've seen soloists try to hire somebody who does that, kind of like a back room of salespeople. Right. And that's mostly been not successful.
Yeah, me too. It's sort of like you can hire robots to like connect with people on LinkedIn and stuff, and I know that there have been some successes, but nobody that's ever worked with me has had success with that. So yeah. So what does it mean? It means like you need to do your homework. You need to pick out that housewarming gift that makes the person's eyes light up. So what does that take? Probably really, this is one of the big reasons why niching down on a very specific target market or ideal buyer makes your life a lot easier, because it makes it a lot easier to pick out that present for them.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about, we've had some examples along the way about tactically how you might want to do this, but what are some ways that we haven't brought up where someone could build this into their process? Or maybe if they were in a cash flow crunch, like, project gets canceled in the middle and all of a sudden they're at loose ends, or they were sure a project was going to come through, but then it didn't at the last minute, and they're like, ugh, I got an empty month. What do I do? So what are some things that you have seen, just tactically speaking, that can work for people like us, where you are initiating the conversation, but in a way that makes it clear that you are not desperate?
Well, I mean, the first thing I always try to do is I try to turn cold to warm. Like, is there a way in this? I'm assuming here that you have a business model that has a particular kind of designated client, and you could even make a list of who those people are. And it's a big enough list to create a business, but not so huge that it's unwieldy. And so I would look, and again, LinkedIn is great for this because you can see how you know people. So if you wanted to get to the CFO of a particular company, you could look and see who's connected or how you're connected to them. And depending on the strength of that relationship, then I might try to piggyback on top of that. And I say the strength of the relationship, the strength of my relationship with the intermediary and the intermediary with them. So an example would be, let's say it's the CFO of Procter & Gamble, and I see that a sort of decent friend, business friend, acquaintance of mine is in the financial department at P&G. I'd probably try to go through them first, because they're in the organization, they probably know them, and they're at the very least, they're going to be able to tell me whether my idea has any legs or not. So it's like looking for a way to make it warmer. And I felt a little awkward doing this, but I had a client I worked with a number of years ago reach out to me and say, hey, I see you're connected to so-and-so at this company. Do you know her well enough to do an introduction? And I wrote back and said, listen, I'm happy to make the introduction, but I met her once in person over 10 years ago. But it was an introduction from a very good friend of both of ours. I've not had any interaction with her since. So, I'd have to do the awkward introduction, but I'm willing to do it. And so he wrote back and said, let's give it a try. And so I gave it a try, and it went nowhere. And so it was one of those things where it's like I still tried because I don't really know this woman, and I thought she could benefit from this thing that this guy was doing. And it's a really cool thing that he's doing, and it's possible. So it's like that's what he did, is he was looking for, how can I get to people like this woman? And, and he shared a little bit of his strategy with me. But those are the kinds of things where if you can get it warm, give it a try. Mm-hmm. Why not?
Yeah, I had a guy named Corey Quinn on Ditching Hourly recently, a couple of weeks ago, I think. And he was the CMO of a digital marketing agency called Scorpion that niched way down. So they had 1 million different kinds of clients, of course, like many digital marketing agencies might. They niched way down on personal injury lawyers like Saul Goodman, and then came up with a strategy to warm up the relationships before their initial cold outreach. Stone cold outreach was sending a really expensive box of chocolate chip cookies, and like premium, the whole experience, like unwrapped, the unboxing experience was like Apple level premium experience. Mm-hmm. Very memorable. They spent $1 million sending out what he called lumpy mail to, so, people listening aren't going to do that. But to your point about warming up like literally starting with a gift, yeah. And it's I suppose probably not the kind of thing that someone listening would use as a tactic, But just to emphasize your point, and they grew the agency from like, I don't know, 20 million to 150 million in 5 or 6 years. So it was like, it totally worked.
It worked.
Yeah. So, and they had this like, well, I won't go into it too much because it's not that relevant, but it worked. But it was systematic. It was generous. It was risky. It was vulnerable. They sent some other really expensive stuff along the way, like every month, and the salespeople would reach out and it's like, oh, you're the guys that sent the cookies,
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I'll put you through, right? It basically boils down to
Right.
that.
Right.
I had another guy on that, in terms of warming things up, this guy is a classic. Well, he's a recruiter, or what's it called when you do sort of high level executive placement, like a
Search, executive search.
I forget the name, but I feel like headhunter. So like a company needed a new CEO or something. And so he would go out and find someone, and then if he placed them, it's kind of like a recruiter, but I thought there was a different name for it.
Well, it's executive search. You're thinking retained, and what you're describing is not retained.
Okay.
It's pay or play.
Okay.
Or play to pay.
Right. So he actually is a hilarious character. He's been doing it for like 40 years, and he came on the show and gave away all the secrets. If you want to go through the back catalog of Ditching Hourly, you can find Norm Lieberman. But his warming things up was he would really do his homework. So like you said about, the person on LinkedIn that was trying to sort of network through you, he would find his way into lower level areas of the company and find out exactly what the challenges were. He would really do his research. Mm-hmm. And then he would get the ideal buyer, say it was the CEO or the chairman of the board or whatever, get them on the phone. And I mean, he sounded like Woody Allen or something. He has like this hilarious voice, and you'd just be like, if I told you I could find you and in the next 30 days, would you give me 3 minutes of your time? Like real hard.
Boiler room.
Really. But he's a soloist, and he would spend a lot of time making sure that thing that he said right then, the person on the other end would be like, yeah, I'll give you 3 minutes. I'll give you an hour. We've been trying to fill that spot for a year. Meanwhile, he knows that.
Right.
So tactically, if you needed to get to that highest level buyer, you need to know what to say before you even get on the call. You're not going to have a chance to get exploratory. So anyway, I just wanted to reference that interview in case anybody's interested in like how he did it. There's another book called Selling to Big Companies that is by Jill Conrath, who's been on the show before. Mm-hmm. And she has just a massive wealth of information in there that last I looked was still very current for tactical ways to do outreach with scripts and everything over email or phone that is really useful if you're trying to get into these kinds of companies.
Well, there's another thing too that happens, especially with the expertise crowd, which is we stop following up. So just because you sent one email and you didn't get a response doesn't mean it ends there. You send a follow-up. Mm-hmm. You send another follow-up. Just for the heck of it, I looked up. I wanted to see like if there were any statistics about how many follow-ups make sense. Because like in my own mind, I'm thinking after about 3, I'm starting to feel like a little spammy. Mm-hmm. And what little research I could find on email follow-up is that you can actually go up to 10 follow-ups and still get results. And it's not even a decreasing line. It's pretty steady. So some people just take more times. And again, we're not talking about, well, did you get my message? Remember? You're not doing that. You're each time you're pinging them in a way that is hopefully welcoming and is not showing your frustration with the fact that they haven't responded back to you. Mm-hmm. Right. Because that's the other thing. People get really frustrated because it's easy to take this personally. Well, this is my ideal client. This is the perfect client for me. Why they should want to talk to me. They should want to pick my brain. Why aren't they calling me back? Well, because it's not all about you. We don't know what else is going on. It's not about you. Let it go. And then once you let it go, then you can write the right follow-up to that individual without having, that personal stuff get in the way.
Mm-hmm. So what are some other ways that you could imagine kind of warming up the cold outreach or like soft softer ways than like norm, sort of getting inside information and then like punching the CEO in the face with it on the phone. Like, what are some more subtle, not subtle, but just like slowly iterative relationship building, remotely, not people in person doing, speed dating at the Chamber of Commerce, but like other kinds of ways that you can do things in a remote world with an expertise business?
One I've seen, but I have mixed feelings about it, but I've seen it work with a number of clients, and that is where you mention something else that you've done. And you have to be really careful that it's not about client name dropping. But if you're in a particular universe and all the companies kind of know each other, you can sometimes drop that you, like if there's, 20 companies in your universe, they all know who each other is. You can say, well, I just finished a really interesting project with XYZ where we did this. And again, it's very dangerous. You really have to be careful. But but there are opportunities like that. Like perhaps you would like, I've just done this project, perhaps you would like to have a conversation about how you're approaching that issue. And again, it's not, I'm going to sit down and tell you what I did with XYZ company, but I have this knowledge and I'm willing to sit down with you to see if maybe there's some commonality. So I've seen that work. Again, usually when it's a fairly small universe and everybody knows everybody else.
Right. Yes, definitely dangerous.
I'm not comfortable doing it. I don't like it personally, but
you reminded me of a couple of stories though with that example. One is I've had dev shops get off, and this has even happened when I was back at a dev shop, where we got off of a project for very, very specific kind of industry. So think like a tree service company, like built this workflow solution for a tree service company that has, say, 20 employees and $5 million of trucks, that sort of thing. So it finished the project or whatever, and you've got this, currently your knowledge of that industry is at an all-time high for you. It's never going to get higher. And so there's a sort of a shelf life on it. So you could reach out to other tree service companies in non-competing markets, because it's a local business. They're not, they're not like going cross state lines probably. You could reach out to different businesses in that market and say, hey, we just finished a project for blah, like you said. They might have never heard of them, but it's a tree service business in Decatur that has 20 employees and they do about, 15 million a year. And we built an internal system for them that delivered these kinds of results. And, while this expertise is still in mind, we wanted to reach out to similar types of companies in non-competitive markets where we could perhaps have a conversation about doing something similar for you. But while our sort of knowledge of the industry is still current, probably in 18 months, I'm sure things change pretty quickly and, it might not be relevant anymore. So it gives a reason why you would reach out right now with not urgency, but like that there's a shelf life for the expertise. Mm-hmm. And, that seems that I feel like back in the day, I feel like I could have pulled that off without feeling or being perceived as desperate, because it just makes sense.
Well, I like the shelf life idea. I mean, I'm thinking about, somebody whose brand is really about, seeing into the future and predicting what's going to happen. That would be an example of, it might make sense to have, maybe you've put together God, I hate to say PowerPoint, but you've put something together about this, and whether it's something you share with the potential client ahead of time, or you have a call where you talk about the results. I sort of imagine like Hinge Marketing does that with their study, that they're probably marketing that to sit down with people and sell their services over the results of the study. So you can do things like that, and as a soloist, you don't have to create a 90-page study deck, but you could have a conversation about the 3 trends that you're seeing in your particular niche for the next year or the next 5 years, if anybody is even doing 5 years out anymore. Right.
I mean, in either one of those cases, the future sort of futurist model or the tree service model, instead of calling them directly or emailing them directly, you could promote a webinar on the three biggest, sort of the 80-20 rule for tree service workflow systems, and put that in front of, one way or another, people in that exact target market, which would be really easy to get a list of those people, like super easy, between LinkedIn and Google, and little clever Google foo and a little outreach. Hey, maybe it's probably for tree service companies, it's probably voicemail, but it could be email. Just say, hey, doing this webinar, yeah, same thing I said before, but as a webinar, to sort of do a one-to-many version of it and see if there's any traction without sort of, if you didn't want to jump straight on a call with people, But
then you have their emails. I mean, that's an interim step. So then you've got their emails. And I think a lot of times we think when you do a webinar, oh, okay, well, if they didn't respond to the offer that I dangled at the end, oh, well, maybe they go on your mailing list, but that's all you do with them. But hey, that's a cold call list right there. I see you came to our seminar, and you've got your follow-up questions.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that idea as well, because the other thing is, the challenge with that is often creating that kind of a webinar is a lot of work, and it can cause you to burrow down into a hole instead of having your ears up and listening to what people are saying.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So I kind of like the one-to-ones, because you're going to understand more about your target market. If you already know what their hot buttons are, that's a different thing. Then you're ready, you're armed, you can go out and have webinars, you can have one-to-ones, you can have all sorts of ways to interact with the people you don't know yet.
Yep. You could turn the, just to flesh out this example, you could turn the tree service experience into a listening tour, where you contact these other people, go to LinkedIn, find their contact information, and say, same thing. I'd love to get I'm thinking about building something for people just like you in the tree service space that are doing 15 million a year. But I don't want to solve a problem that doesn't exist. I'd love to get, even just 10 minutes of your time to get your expert feedback. I'd greatly value it, so on and so forth. So that it could be a similar thing where you're like, oh, maybe we'll turn this thing into a product, but before I build it, it turned into a SaaS, but before I build it, I want to see if there's like any demand for that kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm. There's one other thing that we didn't mention, which is if you're going to be doing a fair number of these, it's worth trying kind of an A/B approach to test. Like, you could test your header, you could test how you ask. How you frame the ask. I mean, and again, I'm assuming this is something where you're asking the same thing of everyone versus some very specific one-to-one cooked up approaches to new business. But I think when we're only going to if we're going to send out 30 or 50 or 100, we kind of go, okay, yeah, I'm going to do this and I'm going to keep sending the same thing over time. No.
Right.
Experiment and see what happens, and maybe even try it if you've got like a good client that's in that space. You could even run it past them and say, if you got something like this, how would you react?
Right.
And get some feedback, because what I found is a lot of times our first draft is still too me focused versus being focused on the recipient. And that's the kind of thing that A/B testing will help you figure out. And when I say A/B, even if you're just sending it from your own email, it doesn't have to be fancy. Just try something different.
Yeah. Whenever I've got someone who's got a list of, say, 100 people, whether it's guests they want to have on their podcast or people who are like potential clients, like perfectly in their target market, I'm like, do not email them all at once. Start off slowly, email 2 or 3, wait to see if you get anything back, process that information, see if, if there's like frequently asked questions or like some kind of, some way that you can improve the outreach in the first place. It's like the thing that turns, certainly a big thing that turns this kind of tactic spammy is to try and automate it or decrease the level of effort. And it's especially with like software developer types, they're like, oh, this is really inefficient. Like this could be much more efficient if I just set up a spreadsheet and do a mail merge. And it's like, don't do that. Don't do that. You're capable of doing that, but that's going to come across as the thing you don't want to come across as, almost certainly. It needs to be more thoughtful. It needs to be more customized. And is that a lot of work? Yeah. But the good news is the spammers aren't doing that work. So it's the thing that will differentiate your email from all the other emails that they get.
Well, and it's just, I'll use an example. When I did I sent out outreach for advanced readers for my book, and I sent every one of those one-to-one. And the core of the message was the same, but the introductions and the closes were mostly different because I knew just enough about them. I mean, some I knew really well and it was like a no-brainer, but there were some where I knew just enough about them where I could say something that they would know. This was not a mass-produced email. I specifically thought of you when I sent this. And then I think the other thing with this is send your low-risk emails first.
Yes, totally agree.
If there's like a handful that you really, really want, don't start with them. Right. Prove the concept on the other people where, you're not going to feel as bad if you get a no.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, start with the easy ones. I'd say the same thing in 5-Day Podcast Challenge. It's like make a list of 10 people you'd like to have as guests and sort it from easiest to get to hardest to get so that you can get some practice doing the outreach to the people who are almost definitely going to say yes and get some confidence, maybe record a few interviews, start to feel how it feels. It's the same concept. I mean, that's still cold outreach. It's not for new business, but it's still cold outreach.
But there's just something, I like your point about building confidence because that is what happens. It's like you don't want to get crushed like a bug your first time out. You want to get, some yeses or some maybes or some, I remember when I was doing the podcast Cold Outreach, somebody said, oh, we'd love to do it. Now our calendar is full, but in 6 months, and they literally sent me a calendar invite 6 months out. I'm like, fine, it's a win. I'm going to take the win. You just, sometimes that's just what you need. You just need some wins in between, and it allows you to feel good about what you're doing, feel like you're gaining traction. And, and this is what you're doing in addition to your day job, right? All the things that you're doing for clients or for your students.
Cool. I feel like we could keep going. I have like a bunch more stories about people that have sent snail mail, people who have strictly done phone outreach because email didn't work because they were trying to get to people who are basically people in trucks fixing stuff and they just don't operate on email. They operate on their cell phones. Podcast invites, content review, which is kind of like a listening tour, but hey, could you take a look at this thing I'm drafting? Could you take a look at the draft of this thing? And they're like, oh, and you're hoping for good feedback to improve it. But also there's the possibility of them saying, I know someone that might need this. Like, when is this going to be ready? So there's just like a million ways you can do this. So what would you, if we were going to bring it back to the high level, I think my main thing would be to work the notion of introducing yourself to other people in this sort of generous and thoughtful way. Make it part of your routine. Not that you necessarily schedule it, but that it's in the back of your mind when the opportunity arises to say hello to someone new when you don't need to. Just get in the habit of doing it.
Yeah, it's the key word is habit. Because when it's a habit, you don't really think about it. Think about doing it. I mean, you think about how you're going to do it and the way that it's going to work. But you're not constantly asking yourself, should I do it? Should I do this time? I mean, you're just getting all of the energy you would have wasted with that back by making it a habit. I think that's critical. And the other piece of this is always make it about them, because everybody is, the WIFM, what's in it for me? That's what you want to show them. We're all alike. We're all selfish creatures on some level, right? And so it's okay to feed into that. It's what people want. It shows that you're generous and you're thoughtful and you're trying to learn about them. And that implies to me a level of humility, which I really like. It makes me feel more connected to the person if I feel like they're willing to make an emotional investment in me.
Yeah.
They're being vulnerable.
And empathetic.
I respect that.
Right. Everybody's got limited resources, especially time. So they have to make decisions constantly all day long about how they're going to spend it. So, you're in competition with the time that you're asking, because I think that's common across all of this, is you're asking for time. Some of their, precious life minutes, as they say. So what's in it for them? It sounds great, but is this a heck yeah? Or is this like a definite no? And yeah.
Cool.
All right, folks. Well, Jackson's ready to go.
Jackson said it's time, so
Yeah.
it is time.
Yeah. All right, folks. That's it for this week. I'm Jonathan Stark.
And I'm Rochelle Moulton.
And we hope you join us again next time for the Business of Authority. Bye.
Bye-bye.